The Midnight Suns are becoming more and more popular by the minute, and you bet we're jumping on that bandwagon. Part 1 of this list popped off, so I'm Adam Andrews with Top 10 Nerd, and this is part 2 of the top 10 most powerful members of the Midnight Suns. Coming in at number 10 is Bats. Look, Bats is Doctor Strange's dog. Is he as powerful as anyone else who is a member of the Midnight Suns? Not even close, but he's a pretty old basset hound who, thanks to a spell, has his barks translated to English. Bats was a really old fella, and so when Loki became the new Sorcerer Supreme, through his nefarious Loki ways, Strange went to confront him and Bats tagged along. Now during the altercation, Bats got agitated and this was too much for his weak old heart and he passed on. Strange gave up Bats' body to Yggdrasil in order to gain power to confront Loki again, and once he finally did, and Loki handed back the Sorcerer Supreme mantle, Loki did say he was sorry about Bats, and that he had apparently tried to find a way to bring him back. What's interesting is that even though Loki did not find a way, momentarily Bats did return as a specter, and now had the ability to possess people's bodies. So, fast forward, when Doctor Strange temporarily had his soul taken by Mephisto, Bats was able to inhabit the body of the Sorcerer Supreme and assisted the Midnight Suns. I love you, Bats, and you guys should too. In at number 9 is Hannibal King. Hannibal King was a simple private investigator just getting by through life. But while working a case in London, Hannibal was bitten by Deacon Frost and turned into a vampire. Now, Hannibal had about 10 times the strength of a regular human, superhuman speed, stamina, agility, and acute senses, a healing factor, shapeshifting abilities, a degree of weather manipulation, and of course, immortality. But Hannibal was disgusted by his new dark life and vowed to only ever feed on blood obtained at a blood bank, and to never use his abilities for his work, which kind of feels kind of dumb on his part, but hey. Thanks to his dark life, it inadvertently brought him into conflict with other vampires, namely Dracula and Blade. Obviously being both good guys, Hannibal and Blade became allies after Hannibal totally handed Blade's butt to him. The pair teamed up, and with Frank Drake, they became the Night Stalkers. He also came into contact and partnership with Doctor Strange, and from there was eventually part of the first ever Midnight Suns team in comic books. Hannibal has been restored from being a vampire and eventually was turned back into one again, but now with a higher resistance to sunlight. I think he's a pretty interesting character, and I kind of hope he shows up in the MCU's Blade movie, but we shall see if we ever get that movie. In at number 8 is Morbius. On the topic of vampires, yes, it is indeed Morbin time, my friends. Michael Morbius isn't a normal vampire. That would be boring. No, thanks to the powers of science, Michael accidentally turned himself into a pseudo-vampire. What's kind of annoyingly complicated is that some of the more mystical vampire elements have been introduced to his character over time. He possesses all the attributes as Hannibal King in terms of benefits, except for shapeshifting and weather manipulation, but he also has a few abilities all of his own. Morbius can use psionics to glide at about 35 miles per hour over short distances. He can turn people into pseudo-vampires as well, and most importantly, he has basically none of the same weaknesses as actual vampires, which is kind of a big deal. He is a little sensitive to sunlight, but it won't kill him, and he does need to consume blood in order to survive, growing weaker the longer he goes without it. Oh, and there is also, of course, the fact that he is absolutely monstrous looking, and sometimes he definitely does not have full control of himself, which unfortunately means he will be sometimes seen as a villain over an actual hero. Thanks to his life before as a Nobel Prize winning biochemist, Morbius is more of a nerdy character than a fighter, but like all heroes, he is obviously somewhat proficient when it comes to combat, but nowhere near the level of someone like our number 7 spot, Blade. Ha! Another vampire! Yes, but similar to Mr. Morbin Time, Blade is not a true vampire. Thanks to his peculiar birth, Blade is what is known as a dampire or a dampier. He is also referred to as Daywalker, and as you might guess, that means that Blade is indeed immune to sunlight, where other vampires are either knocked out or burnt to a crisp by it. Except, Blade is affected by red sunlight, which is kind of odd, but I guess older, bigger suns fueled by helium just have a stronger effect? Whatever the reason, Blade is also immune to pretty much all the vampire weaknesses except for the need to feed on blood, although he has developed a daily serum that gives him the benefits of feeding but at an even greater level. Blade also has all the classic physical enhancements that vampires have, but while he is immune to vampire bites, he is not immune to pseudo-vampire bites. So when he was bit by Morbius, Blade did actually gain some extra abilities. He can sense supernatural beings and forces. While not immortal, he has a longer lifespan and he can transform into a more monstrous form with wings, which is super cool. He can also, instead of making vampiric thralls, transfer or take away ailments and concoctions in others' veins. So, as an example, after ingesting a cure, he could take away the Roxxon Berserker Shock Trooper's Hulk-like transformation abilities, which is really cool. And I haven't even touched on Blade's top-notch fighting skills, being trained from a young age to be one of the greatest vampire hunters in the whole world. But I've got other people to talk about, so let's just move on. And at number 6 is Werewolf by Night. Growing up, I always thought the idea of werewolves were super cool. Like, obviously vampires and werewolves and all that are terrifying, but being able to turn into a big half-wolf, half-person with greatly enhanced strength, speed, stamina, reflexes, agility, senses, and resistance to injuries, with massive claws and fangs and the ability to heal hella quick, is obviously somewhat cool because Marvel has not only created Werewolf by Night as a hero, but there are a whole whack of characters that have very similar wolfy-like abilities. Jack Russell, Werewolf by Night, is obviously the classic though. Thanks to his ancestors getting bitten by Dracula-hired werewolves and reading the Darkhold, Jack Russell is in possession of a curse that allows him to transform into a werewolf at will, but also forces a more monstrous transformation under a full moon. So, being a full-on monster sometimes and having a weakness to silver are some obvious downsides, plus the fleas, but like turning into a werewolf, it's still cool to me, and it gives you a foot in the door to make it onto the Midnight Suns. Double whammy. And in at number 5 is the Scarlet Spider. As the #1 clone of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly has been through a lot. He has been sent to the afterlife and returned from it multiple times, driving him insane for a while. He had identity crises, operated in Las Vegas, fought the Inheritors, became a corporate superhero, he's been in possession of the Carnage symbiote, and he now goes by the name Chasm as a villain. And he has one of the coolest looks I have ever seen in a Spider-Man suit. Now, being a clone of Spider-Man, he possesses all those same proportional spider-like abilities, and he also had the added benefit of looking and behaving exactly like one of Marvel's most popular heroes, which gave Marvel a way to have a Spider-Man on the Midnight Suns without actually needing it to be Peter Parker. It does actually make a bit of sense for Ben though, considering his relationship with dying and resurrecting. When he was in Las Vegas, that's when the demon Mephisto made his attempt to steal the souls of everyone living in the city. So of course Scarlet Spider was down to help the Midnight Suns in stopping him. He actually made a deal with Mephisto to stop the Suns in exchange for his friend's life, but he pulled a fast one on the tricky demon and totally went back on his word. Hilarious. And in at number 4 is Wolverine. Alright, we are finally stepping away from the monsters and animal-themed heroes and a dog. Well, kind of. The mutant Wolverine isn't actually an animal, but he certainly has some animalistic qualities. Born in the 19th century, Wolverine has had a long life and gone through a hell of a lot more than almost anyone. Obviously, he has been experimented on and weaponized by Weapon X, who gave him his adamantium-infused skeleton, but he has interacted with almost every facet of the Marvel landscape. Using his popularity, berserker rage, crazy powerful healing factor, super acute senses, and of course, his claws, he has been part of the X-Men and of course X-Force, the Avengers and Savage Avengers, Alpha Flight, S.H.I.E.L.D., The Hand, the Yakuza, and the Horsemen of Apocalypse, among many other teams and groups. He's teamed up with or fought almost every popular hero at least one time. He has been around for and survived some of the biggest moments in recent human history. He's traveled through time and space and is going to be part of the Midnight Suns because he has experience with pretty much everything apparently, so why not? You want to boost up the popularity of a team or a story, you just throw Wolverine in there and he can take it. And at number 3 is Zoe Laveau. From Wolverine, who's been around for forever, to Zoe Laveau, who is recently new to comics. Zoe comes from a long line of female sorcerers going back to Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Except Zoe wasn't really as proficient with magic as she hoped, and in a desperate attempt to change that, she turned to Gaslamp, a dark magic user who grants wishes, but of course, at a cost. She would gain enhanced magical abilities, but this would never last, meaning she would need to go back to Gaslamp for more and more. Every time the dark magic would wear more and more on her as well until she actually passed away. Her parents were obviously distraught, so they turned to their ancestor Marie Laveau, who managed to bring her back, but thanks to the dark magic, Zoe was left looking deceased, forcing her to wear a magical amulet to change her appearance. Zoe eventually joined the Strange Academy, where she proved proficient with hypnosis and necromancy among other magical abilities. Now, Zoe accidentally ended up presenting a vision to supernatural characters throughout the Marvel Universe, and as a result, a new team of Midnight Suns was brought together together that featured herself, Blade, Wolverine, Kushala, and Magic from part 1 of this list, and the number 2 spot of this list, Nico Minoru. As the leader of the Runaways, a member of the A-Force, a former Master of Evil in training, and the Professor of Creative Spellcrafting at Strange Academy, Nico, aka Sister Grimm, is both weirdly unheard of by casual comic readers and really varied in her experiences. Her parents, along with the other Runaways' parents, were part of a mystical cult that performed sacrifices, and the Runaways formed in direct opposition to this. Nico herself has a magical aptitude, being able to cast flight, telekinesis, teleportation, and shielding spells all on her own with minimal training. But specifically, she relies heavily upon a magical artifact called the Staff of One, or the Witchbreaker Staff, which it recently transformed into. The staff is really cool, but it has a pretty major downside: the fact that it doesn't allow its wielder to cast the same spell twice. It will either just do nothing, or what is arguably worse, cast a completely random spell. Now, I'm assuming that having to constantly work around this probably is what gave her the necessary experience to become Professor of Creative Spellcasting, but that's just a guess. And finally, in at number 1 is Jennifer Kale. Jennifer Kale, being a member of the Kale family, is indeed a cousin of both Johnny Storm and Danny Ketch. But while they were both Ghost Riders, Jennifer had a different magical path to follow. Way back in Earth's history, before the great cataclysm that sunk the city of Atlantis, a sorceress named Zered Na founded a cult of sorcerers all about demons and Man-Thing and just a whole bunch of mystical cult stuff. Now, you fast forward to the more modern day, and Joshua Kale, Jennifer's dad, was the leader of this cult, living in the Florida Everglades next to the nexus of all realities, and of course, the Man-Thing. Now, Jennifer, being interested in witchcraft, totally read from one of her dad's books and accidentally summoned Thog the Nether Spawn, which brought her into contact with Man-Thing and revealed her psychic connection with the creature. So she's got that huge boon. But Jennifer is a wildly powerful sorcerer, gaining power by tapping into her own personal power, the universal ambient energy, and the power of other mystical entities and objects. She was trained by an ancient sorcerer from Atlantis named Kim, and she is said to eventually reach the level of Zered Na herself. Her magical proficiency has brought her into contact with Doctor Strange, Korax, Spider-Man, Howard the Duck, and of course, the Midnight Suns, which even saw her possessed by Dormammu, and she looked so cool when that happened. Terrifying, but definitely cool. And that's part 2. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I'm Adam Andrews, this is Top 10 Nerd. I'll catch y'all on the flippy flop. Peace out.